The other concept which we use on a day-to-day basis is your defense in depth. So layering security controls. That means we don't have to rely on a single security measure. We should never rely on a single security measure, right? Say that we say if we have an antivirus, we really cannot rely only on antivirus to make sure that we are trying to detect everything, right? And that's why layering of security controls is so important. So in this approach, say we are protecting our data. So this is also known as your either mission critical, right? This is the modern terminologies that companies are using to define some of the critical data, right? And it should be layered with another application, right? So if that application is using, say, any sort of SSO authentication mechanism and authorization mechanism using PIM tools and whatnot, and that would be sitting on another compute layer wherein we are managing our entire OS patch management and your malware protection, including your endpoint protection, right? Endpoint protection mechanism. And there's another layer on top of that, which is your internal network, followed by perimeter, physical. If this is applicable, most of the time it really does not make sense to emphasize on physical if you really don't have one, and it needs to be governed by your policies, procedure, and awareness, right? So these are the sort of defense in depth layer that we really need to follow in the real life as well. And this is not something that you would see, having a proper diagram around it or something of that sort. You would be looking at from a governance perspective too, right? The companies would be having a set of policies and procedures. They would also have your perimeter security, and they would have internal uh, isolation of certain network as well, and then also compute with followed by the patch management application, and the data that's residing on your workstation, on your servers and cloud whatnot, right? So in terms of physical, specifically in terms of physical security, whenever if you're relying on a cloud, right? Say that you're storing your data on Azure or AWS, GCP, or any co-location data center that you are using, make sure that you are also testing their controls. So when I say testing their controls, that means you are having enough assurance on their controls, which is also known as your third party risk management. This is really important. There are a lot of breaches in the recent past, and when I say recent past, in the past 2 years, that happened solely due to the third party. And I think one of the examples that probably we were discussing in some of the other sessions, that you know since there was a lack of a proper third party testing and third party security controls, they really got hacked, and the data was exfiltrated. They lost a huge amount of money based on their size of organization and whatnot, right? So it's really important to have those reliances, right? We just really cannot say that my data is stored with Azure, AWS, or GCP. It's big names out there in the market, and hence my data is secure. We cannot really say that, because there were a lot of issues with Azure as well in the past. There were a lot of issues similarly with AWS and GCPs. So it's really important to have that assurance. And the reason I'm focusing on the third party risk management, is because a lot of times we are heavily relied on third parties for our critical processes and technologies to be rendered to us. And it's really important for us to have that clarity with them, have regular monitoring, and making sure that the SLAs are being met, quite frequently. If not anything less than 95%, they should be above meeting their SLAs above 95%. Yes, Shri. All right, so I guess there's a question from Ritesh. Wouldn't SOC 2 be sufficient for this assurance? No. So the answer is no. So we know that SOC 2 is one of the SOC 2 type 2. So we also need to make sure that it's a type 2 report, not a type 1 report. Obviously, someone who's going for the SOC assessment for the first time, they would always go for type 1 because it's mandatory, and they have to pass type 1, and then only they can jump directly to type 2. You cannot directly go for the type 2 assessment, right? So SOC 2 type 2 report is should not be the only criteria that you rely on your vendor. It never should be, because SOC 2, the nature of the audit is such that the samples that are picked are really random, and say that the third party assessments, third party supplier that you're onboarding, they are really huge, and the nature of the business is such that they would be onboarding a lot of employees within their payroll, right? Or there would be a lot of attrition rate within themselves. So it's really important to understand that what sort of controls are covered. It's really important on that. So what controls are covered as a part of SOC 2 Type 2? This is really important to understand. And does that overlaps with your services that's being rendered to you? So this overlap needs to be understood properly. We really need to have that clarity whether or not the scope of the SOC 2 Type 2 assessment overlaps with the services that you're trying to render from the third party vendor. So it's really important on that front. Having said that, I would strongly suggest that, if you are only relying on SOC 2 Type 2, it shouldn't be the case. You should always have a 1 hour, 2 hour, or at least a 3 hour call, 3 hour calls, probably in a phased manner, with your third party to understand their technical controls and as well as their administrative controls, right? This is because every auditor would have a different mentality when they go for, they would have a different perspective whenever they would go for the external audit, and they would be performing audits on their clients, right? They would have a different perspective. And if there's anything specific that you are looking for, that is something that you really need to get it clarified with the third party vendor. And it's really important to understand the overlap as well. This should be reviewed by the senior leadership management. That's non-negotiable. And the report should also be reviewed by the respective business owners who would be closely involved in using those services from the third party vendors. So, and there should be a final sign off saying that, the controls that are covered in the SOC 2 Type 2 report of the third party vendor um, aligns with our expectation and requirements, and there should be a formal sign off on that. Because in certain regions, that's a very specific requirement that you should be reviewing your third party's assurance reports, and if you're not, then you're failing that control objective. So it's in certain countries there's some specific mandates if you're operating into a regulated industry.